So it seems that the Adeptus Custodes are now one of the biggest, baddest armies to fear. So let's take a look at how people are implementing the codex on the tabletop. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Custodes. The codex has been out for almost a month at time of recording, so I thought it was high time that we take a look at a couple of competitive Custodes lists and take a look at some of the choices that the top players are making. With that in mind, we'll take a look at two different Custodes lists today, and hopefully two of their armies took second and third at the Las Vegas Open, the biggest 40k tournament in the world, one where almost everyone turns up with some incredibly strong, hard-hitting armies. And basically, if you finish anywhere near the top of this kind of event, it kind of shows that your army list is ridiculously efficient, as well as the individual players being really good at the game. Hilariously enough, after taking second and third at one of the biggest, baddest 40k events around, Custodes have actually been buffed since then and chapter approved, certain units going down in points, everyone gets free Misericordias, shield captains in general are a bit more competitive, and Trajan Valoris bikes and Terminators are also going down in cost. It basically means that you could actually have a fair bit of wiggle room in a couple of these lists for even more units. The Custodes really are an army to fear right now. First up, I thought we'd take a quick look at Matt Laura's Shadowkeepers list, second overall at the LVO, and just pipped at the post by Mr. Richard Ziegler's AdMech. The armies fit into a single Shadowkeepers battalion, certainly one of the more competitive new shield companies. For their fighting style, they get a very nice melee debuff. Any enemy units in combat with them subtract 1 from their attacks characteristic. That's really going to make them significantly harder to shift in melee. For certain squads, that could cut their damage output by a third or even a half. A very nice combat survivability boost. On top of that, they also get a reroll wound rolls against character units, obviously far more niche, but it does mean that any army that's reliant on characters is just going to be easier to gun down, and certainly easier to kill in combat. I think possibly the single biggest attraction to the Shadowkeepers for me, though, is their 1 command point Grim Responsibility stratagem. This means that Shadowkeepers units excluding vehicles have a powerful defensive boost in the bag, both at range and melee. If you spend 1 command point, then the enemy attacks are going to be -1 strength when they target that unit. In some combats or against some range attacks, it's not going to make any difference whatsoever, but for some weapon profiles it is absolutely massive. Say for example, if one of your units was charged by some Blade Guard veterans, you can make all of their powerful Strength 5 attacks into Strength 4, and now with that hefty Power Sword damage, the Space Marine player is going to be wounding you on 5s, not 4s, a massive debuff to the amount of hurt that you're going to stack on their unit. That combined with the -1 attacks in melee, it's just going to make them crazily durable. For the unit selections themselves, the force is unsurprisingly led by Trajan Valoris. He's the warlord, and certainly at his even further improved points cost, I think he's almost an auto-include for just about every competitive Custodes list. Ridiculously strong melee damage, great command abilities, really tough to take out, and has that great moment shackle. Very undercosted for what he does, I think. Then there are 2 other shield captains supporting him, both of which will have also dropped him points by 10 since chapter approved. The first one, a shield captain on Dawn Eagle jetbike with a salvo launcher for a bit more ranged punch. He's a massively stacked character, having the excellent tip of the spear trait for extra damage in melee. That's a brutal melee buff on the charge for just 15 points. He makes use of the unique Shadowkeepers stuff, the Lockwarden Warlord trait, which allows him to ignore invul saves for characters, meaning he's a pretty excellent assassin, just being able to go straight through whatever he targets, and the absolute great Stasis Oubliette, a fight's last mechanic for 1 unit within engagement range, again absolutely excellent to have on 1 character within the army. And just to make sure that those 9 wounds aren't so easy to take out as well, he's also got a 5+ feel no pain from an extra Warlord trait with superior creation. Absolutely brutal against just about anything, but particularly against any characters, he should just be really easy to go through most characters in a single round of combat. There's then a shield captain in Terminator armor with a Praetorian plate and Radiant mantle. The Praetorian plate certainly seems like one of the best relics in the Custodes Codex. You add 1 to your toughness, so your toughness 6, and more importantly he gets a once per game kind of heroic intervention but kind of not, appearing next to a Custodes unit to engage nearby enemies. He's also got the Radiant mantle for an extra -1 to your hit roll, making him even tougher with that toughness 6 Terminator armor, and he also takes a captain commander trait in the Unstoppable Destroyer, boosted pile in and consolidate, and can also go in any direction, potentially allowing him to hit a melee unit hard and then consolidate into something else so they can't strike him back. To be honest, every single one of these characters looks like a right nightmare to deal with, and a great investment of points and command points. For the troops that are actually leading into battle, there's 3 squads of Custodian Guard with spears. As per the new points changes, they'd also be able to take Misericordias for free now. Solid units for protecting the characters, and those auric weapons will be quite good with that Salvus Catar. giving you really quite a lot of auric weapons that you can double shoot for a turn. There's also a unit of Custodian Wardens with axes. They kind of do a very similar job to the Custodian Guard with spears. A few more points, but you gain an attack and a feel no pain type save. I kind of suspect that they're here primarily for the Bodyguard special rule though, as it means that you can give some guaranteed protection to the Shield Captains and Trajan, at least until the enemy manages to neutralise the Wardens, who could hide out of line of sight. Finally for squads, there are 3 individual Allarus Custodians, the Custodian Terminators that can now be taken in units of 1, and again these dropped in points by 5. I'll be honest, I'm a bit less certain as to how these were used. I believe that as the LVO used the Octarius rules, they could be quite good for objectives and actions and things, though with the new rules like that Nachman's data, they're not going to be retrieving that anymore. Still though, seem pretty handy enough for small troubleshooting threats, maybe for diverting to enemy units that don't need a full squad of Custodians to deal with. Finally, and dipping into some Forge World vehicle support, there's 2 Contemptor Galatus Dreadnoughts, ridiculously tough models to shift in melee, 9 wounds with a 2+ save and a 4+ invul, and when you're in melee with them as a Shadowkeepers unit, they'll be -1 to hit, and also the enemy will also get -1 attack. They also have a 6+ feel no pain, and really quite a generalist melee weapon as well, usually around 7 strength 7, AP -3 and damage 3 hits. One of them takes that pre-game Eternal Penitent upgrade, the one that gives you +1 attack for a Dreadnought and re-rolling charges. Finally, there's 2 Caladius Grav tanks with accelerator cannons, sorry not culverins as I wrote there. Perhaps nothing too complex going on with them, very fast moving tanks with decent generalist fire support, 14 quality shots that are going to be very effective against infantry or light vehicles. Overall, just an all-round scary and very efficient list, 3 enormously big hitting characters, a whole bunch of Auspex Custodian Guard that are going to be hard to shift in Shadowkeepers, and a couple of big hitting Dreadnoughts, and a bit of quality fire support. A really cool army, and of course one that must have been played very well indeed to reach second in 40k's biggest tournament. The second list was only narrowly behind this, an Emperor's Chosen list that finished third, run by Evan Tomchin. Rather than Shadowkeepers, this one's using the Emperor's Chosen, another ridiculously solid shield company, though has a bit of a different fighting style. This one allows you to reroll 1 hit or wound roll whenever a unit shoots or fights, so a little bit of extra damage there, and particularly good with Virtus Praetor salvo launchers, and particularly relevant in current 40k, they get a big 4+ shrug off against mortal wounds, really relevant against certain armies right now, particularly things like Grey Knights and Thousand Sons with their mass psychic. Again, their stratagem is perhaps one of the most interesting things about them. For 1 CP, one of your units can adopt a different shield host fighting style for a turn. That gives you all sorts of possibilities, such as fall back and charge, fights first, or the rerolls versus characters and -1 attacks from Shadowkeepers, as we discussed, and their unique Qatar is Rendax, which is pretty handy, potentially giving you 2 turns of hit rolls of 6 automatically wounding monsters and vehicles if you want it. That could be pretty relevant against things like Crusher Stampede or any other monster or vehicle heavy armies. Again, the list is headed up by a trio of characters, the murderous command machine that is Trajan Valoris as the Warlord, and a shield captain on Dawn Eagle jet bike with salvo launcher as the second in command. Again, he's absolutely stacked out with a captain commander trait, 2 warlord traits, and a relic. Again, he's got tip of the spear for those rerolls when he's on the charge. Auric Exemplar is the Emperor's Chosen one, which allows him to get extra attacks per model slain. And he takes the Castellan's Mark, allowing him to redeploy 2 friendly shield host units. That could be particularly good for optimally positioning something like the Dreadnoughts or the Virtus Praetors. Really good to have that flexibility depending on whether you know you're going first or second. He also takes Superior Creation for that 5+ feel no pain type save. Sorry, I forgot to record that on here. He takes that with that Victor of the Blood Games stratagem that allows you to take 2 Warlord traits on the same model. Finally, in the Elite slot, there's a Vexillus Praetor with the Vexilla Magnifica. That's the one that gives you an aura of -1 to hit. Certainly none too bad for keeping the Custodians safe when they're out in the open. Interesting that it was still chosen to make the cut over the one that grants light cover for the +1 to save, just to give him a bit more utility. As a relatively safe character, he also has Impregnable Mind. He gets a bit of psychic defense with Deny the Witch with +1 to the test. Really nice with a command reroll for shutting down a key power quite reliably. And he also counts as a bit more towards holding objectives, which is never a bad thing. The core squads maybe aren't so very different from the previous list. This time there's only 2 units of Custodian Guard. One of them takes the spears, one of them takes the Presidium shields, perhaps a little bit better suited for holding objectives in light cover or slogging out into the open. Again, there's a unit of Wardens, this time with spears, nice for some bodyguard shenanigans, and there's a unit of Prosecutors to fill out the troop slots, some nice cheap Sisters of Silence to sit on objectives or maybe do some actions. Finally, for vehicles, there are a few Forge World Dreadnoughts on offer. This time only one of the Contemptor Galatus dreadnoughts. Again, this guy takes the Eternal Penitent trait, and then two of the slightly less durable but massively more damaging Contemptor Achilles dreadnoughts. They're the ones with the dreadnought-sized Guardian Spears, a few really quality anti-tank shots at range, and then a brutal amount of damage D3+3 attacks when you get into melee with them. Again, very efficient core units, good fun to use, and they'll make excellent use of the Emperor's Chosen rerolls of 1 hit or 1 wound. Finally, and perhaps the single most defining feature of the list, are two terrifying looking units of Virtus Praetors with salvo launchers, enormously fast movement at 14 inches, and then throwing down some high quality anti-tank shots that get some very good reliability from those rerolls and potentially further rerolls from that Dawn Eagle Jetbike Captain. They've got 5 wounds now and still pack an absolutely brutal punch in melee. These guys have the movement to reach their targets and are basically guaranteed to be causing carnage every turn until they're neutralised, so put a very hefty amount of pressure on the opponents and force them to deal with them rather than the other units that are hopefully winning the game on objectives. Again, another truly fearsome list, loads of good options with that Emperor's Chosen stratagem for some flexible unit manipulation, and again an indomitable wall of gold backed up by some heavy hitting vehicles and characters. Certainly has a few strengths and weaknesses compared with the Shadowkeepers, more durable against mortal wounds, a bit less durable against melee and certain strength, but gains some lovely flexibility and some massive hitting power. Quite cool to see 2 different Custodes builds make it onto the podium, a real testament both to army building and player skill. So as always, let me know what you think down in the comments below, and particularly if you have any other insights on the list, how they were played, or any other crafty things that you can do with Custodes. I'm always interested in hearing other tactics. If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or we'll be hoping to get a few more Custodes videos coming out over the next week or two. Hopefully doing a revamped faction tier list, a start collecting guide, and some unit reviews. It just depends on how much other stuff is going on for the other armies. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention one way in which you can help support Auspex Tactics, and that's my Element Games affiliate link down in the video description. If you're looking up to pick up some Custodes or just about any other 40k in the near future, Element Games is a discount retailer based in the UK. They give between 10 and 20% off Games Workshop's miniatures, and if you do order anything through them, a small amount goes to help support Auspex Tactics. It doesn't cost you any more whatsoever compared with just buying from them regularly, so it can just be a way to help support the channel on purchases that you were going to make anyway. There's also an Amazon link down there as well for people over in the USA. Again, if you are happening to buy something on Amazon, if you click that first, again a small amount goes to help support the channel without costing you more. A huge thank you to you guys who have been using those, it is massively appreciated, and a really big thank you for listening. I'll hope to see you guys next time.